Hello and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I wanted to let you know that today's episode comes with a Patreon exclusive mini episode attached. These new companion mini episodes will be a regular feature, and you can hear details of how to access them at the end of today's episode. Subscribing is very easy, and for £5 a month you can get access to these new mini episodes, as well as a brand new set of interviews, with this month's guest being the superstar clarinetist Julian Bliss. The details for this and other ways to support the podcast financially are in the show notes below. Just click on the link, subscribe and join a whole group of fans helping to make this podcast possible. Today I conduct a conversation with a conductor whose career path is similar to my own. After spending time as an orchestral player in London, he's gone on to have an extremely busy and successful conducting career, holding title positions in Sweden, Germany and the United States. It is a real pleasure to welcome Michael Francis. Michael, it's lovely to talk to you today. How are you?
Fine, thanks, Mike. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and what a marvellous podcast series you have going on. So terrific.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. You may be my first double bass player. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I can't think of any others. Was the double bass the very beginning? How did it start? How did music first come into your life?
Well, I suppose Kusevitsky's long gone, and you haven't got hold of Zubin Mehta yet.
No.
The Havshani's a bass player. I've seen that. So
Okay.
there's a few of us out there. For me, I started. Yes, it was with the double bass. My father was a teacher, so that really kind of got it going for me. Because it was the bass, I didn't start that young. I was probably about 10 or 11, came home from playing football one day and said, "Can I have a go, Dad?" And he said, "Sure." And then I got lessons all the time and then just sort of carried on. But because I played the bass, it meant I got to do a lot of good stuff straight away. I think within 6 months, I remember I was playing Tchaikovsky 4, well, not playing Tchaikovsky 4, looking like I was playing Tchaikovsky 4, and touring around communist Hungary with the Brighton Youth Orchestra.
Wow.
So it just meant that I had this fantastic experience. And then my dad was obviously doing a lot of the amateur stuff in East Sussex, where I was raised. So he would kind of say, "Come on, do you want to come along and play?" So from the age of 12, 13, I was doing all these amateur stuff and just traveling to Brighton, to Lewes, to Eastbourne, and doing all the local amateur orchestras. And by the time I was 18, I sort of played most of the repertoire, not necessarily at the highest standard, but just got through a lot of it. So for me, the bass was the beginning, and it's a marvelous instrument to learn how to conduct.
Well, I mean, yes, yeah, because you're at the foundation of everything musically. For those who are interested to know why the double bass immediately gets into the first team, so to speak, the double bass, the viola, and probably the bassoon are the instruments that if you can half decently play at any orchestra, oh yeah, we need bass players. Every amateur orchestra, every youth orchestra is scrabbling around for basses, violas, bassoons, currently in Birmingham French horns as well. And yeah, it's you get straight in there, don't you?
And you do, and also you get a great variety. For me, I had the pleasure of playing the amateur orchestras or the classical stuff, but I also got to do the musicals. That was fun, earn a bit of cash, sometimes a bit of jazz. I'm not a natural jazzer by any means, but I got to do a bit of that. And then, of course, bass guitar is not very far away. So when you're 14 and trying to look cool at school, you can pull out the bass guitar. So it was just a really great all-around instrument. And you can just, as you say, if you own a bass and you know how to tune it, you're pretty invaluable in most necks of the wood.
Cruel, but possibly fair. Going ahead, well, actually, no, let's stay where we are for now before we go to university or music college. You have met conductors by this point. What was it something that interested you from that sort of age, or did it come in later during your life?
So there was a moment actually where it sort of the seed was sown, and it was in East Sussex, and I was playing with one of the youth orchestras, and Roger Durston, who I think went to Wells Cathedral School, he was the head of music down in East Sussex, and I was being a bit of a backseat driver, trying to lead the orchestra from the bottom, which doesn't always work on double bass because you don't have enough notes to direct the melody. But I was doing that, and he turned around to my father and said, "You know, that boy should be a conductor." And at the time I was thought, oh, what a great compliment. I think what he was saying is he's really annoying playing in the orchestra. He'll be safer at the front on the podium. But from that point, it's sort of something went off in my mind. And then when I was at school, when I was in 16, 17 in Lewis, in East Sussex, then I started to dabble a little bit in it. And I made a decision when I was 17 not to go to music college to study double bass. I figured at that point, I wanted to go to university, sort of get the academics, learn about music analysis, musicology, and all these things. And I made that decision to do that. And that was really the start of it for me. And then I did some at university. In fact, when I started conducting, you can see on the Zoom call, I've got curly hair, but when I started, my hair was so long, I actually had dreadlocks. So my very first time conducting was the Magic Flute Overture, which is quite hard. Of course, you don't realize how hard it is when you start. And people said that my long, curly, matted, awful hair was bobbing up and down in Cardiff University. I mean, I thought I looked cool, but apparently I looked like the back end of a sheep. But so that was my beginning to conducting. And then I was pretty clear about what I wanted to do from that point.
Were you getting lessons at Cardiff University or the attached music college in Cardiff from anybody?
No, I mean, just double bass. Actually, I've never formally studied conducting. So then after Cardiff, I was still very clear I wanted to do conducting. So I went to the Royal Academy to study double bass with Duncan McTeer, and I did a master's. But that was because I really thought, well, the best thing I can do to be a conductor, I mean, lots of great conductors don't play an orchestra, but for me, I knew the best thing for me would be to join an orchestra. So I really practiced a lot on double bass, sort of put the conducting aside, did a little bit, dabbled in it here and there. And then I was fortunate to start a decentish freelance career and got a job in the LSO. But that was really my way into it. But even then when I was there, I really wasn't doing very much. It was just, I was always looking at the scores. I was always interested in it.
Yeah. Wow. In the LSO, what a great place to learn. I mean, similar to me in the fact that, I did 22 years in the CBSO, but I didn't join thinking about being a conductor. I joined wanting to be the best violinist I could be, and it later sort of happened. But when you joined the LSO, I'm imagining you're looking at whoever was conducting you week after week after week and picking up ideas, also looking at the bad ones and thinking, my God, I must never do that if I ever become a conductor. What was that thought process like? Were you, I mean, obviously when you join an orchestra at the start, there's so much to learn, but then once you've got your feet under the table and you're playing in a great orchestra like that, and a great bass section like that, I'm assuming the mind starts to wander and you're looking at these people in front of you and you're assimilating everything.
Yes, and it's a great question. And for me, it was, of course, when you start, you're just, as you say, just learning to do the job. I mean, the first few years, the LSO, like all the British orchestras, is extremely busy. So you get through a ton of repertoire, and most of which you're doing for the first time. So there's just an awful lot to be able to do the job at the high level, and everyone around you, is so talented. So there was that. But even then, when I joined, the section knew I was always interested in conducting. And I think, quite a few of them said, we know you're not going to be a lifer, but come enjoy it, and we had a great time, and I loved it. And it was just also that variety, sort of going from doing Mahler with great conductors and then being in the studio and doing Star Wars with John Williams. For me, watching Return of the Jedi in 1983 or whatever it was when I was 7, that was as exciting to do those sort of things as much as it was to be traveling around the world playing with this fantastic orchestra, and of course playing with great conductors. But yes, I was already at that point sort of clear that I wanted to do it, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. I got to do a couple of amateur things in London, a few youth orchestras here and there, but really nothing at all. So those first few years were just learning how to play the bass, learning how to do the job. Then I started to be able to really observe the conductors that we had come in. And over time, as I became more comfortable in my job, I could spend more time studying the music and then really thinking about it. But the way it started, you can't plan the way that my sort of conducting happened. That sort of it was an unusual start.
Well, my question was going to be, did you have a plan for exit? Because in my career, that was something that took three of us to sort of work out. The chief executive and his assistant at the CBSO and myself, and we sat and worked it out. Did you have a plan for exit? And by the way you've just said what you've just said, I'm assuming your actual exit was nothing like how you'd planned it. If you had a plan.
Well, once I tell you how it happened, I think if I had a plan, you would think of me as dastardly and Machiavellian and rather dangerous, because it would involve poisoning conductors, which of course I wasn't doing. So, I mean, for me, it all began back in, I think it was August 2006, and we were on tour in Vilnius to do Shostakovich 4 with Gergiev, and we didn't know where Gergiev's plane was. He was flying in on a private one from St. Petersburg. And so Catherine McDowell came up to myself and Matthew Gibson, another bass player, who did a bit of conducting as well, and said, look, we don't know where he is. Will one of you take the rehearsal now? And he said no. And I said, okay. And by providence, I'd been studying the music that day. And I'm a bit of a nerd and I liked to do it. So 30 seconds later, I'm walking up in front of my colleagues and conducting Shostakovich 4. And that was quite a turning point, because lots of things happened. Of course, for the first few minutes, they were laughing, taking mobile phone shots. And then they realized I was not terrible. I mean, I was by no means competent, but I didn't embarrass myself. But the feeling of conducting this orchestra was just incredible. We hadn't played it for quite a few months, so they needed the run through. But I remember a moment when I cued the brass, and Maurice Murphy was still in the orchestra then, Rod Franks, and I cued them this, and then I stopped. Vroom, and this feeling, so like, you're a wizard, Harry. I mean, it was just this unbelievable sensation of what it's like to drive or to fly this fighter jet. And then Gergiev turned up, and from that point, I started to do a few more things. And then in January 2007, for his first concert as music director or chief conductor, he didn't do. He was sick. So it was music by Sofia Gabay-Delina, and they couldn't find a proper conductor. So they knew that I was pretty good in a pinch. So Catherine said to me again, look, can you get this ready and have the rehearsals ready? We're going to try and find someone else, but just in case, can you do it? And it was all music by her, and they didn't manage to find someone to do the two big pieces. They did find Mikhail Yurovsky to do the offertorium with Leonidas Kavakos, who understandably wanted to do it with the conductor who'd done it before. But the first piece, the American poem, the fairy tale poem, and Pro et Contra, I did it, and I conducted it in the concert. And that, I think, was the real turning point. So, I mean, it was a case of just saying yes and not understanding how hard the thing I was about to do was. And then 3 weeks later, and this is why I said if I'd planned it, you'd think that it was pretty malicious. John Adams got sick on a tour with the LSO, and we were in Cologne the night before, and he looked really peaky. And then the next day, Lenny Mackenzie, the chairman, came up to me in his sort of Scottish thing and said, Michael, John Adams doesn't look very well. Do you think you might be able to have a look at the music this afternoon? I said, sure, no problem. And then that afternoon, just devoured the music as quickly as I could. We had a seating call, not a proper rehearsal, and it was Slaminsky's Earbox. I mean, it's all his own music. The Dharma at Big Sur with Leila Jesesovich. And then, what do we do then? Naive and Sentimental Music. So it meant I was sight conducting in the concert. And in fact, the committee of the orchestra hadn't even decided by the end of the short little seating rehearsal whether they would let me conduct the whole concert. And in the end, they said, come on, let's give him a shot. And I did. I managed to sort of get the orchestra through. And at the end of that concert, I mean, there's quite a few things that happened in it. Firstly, the orchestra were amazing. I mean, they'd done it the night before, so it was up and running. They covered so many of my mistakes. And there was a moment which it was a really difficult bit to conduct, and it was in 5/8 or something, and you get the orchestras in 7 and 9. John Adams' music can be so complicated, and he'd made some mistakes conducting himself. And I got through this bit, and rather sort of cheekily, I sort of looked at the orchestra and wiped my brow and phew. And then I looked down, and then I realized, oh no, I'm lost. And then it all looked the same. And I thought, oh no, I don't know, I'm going to carry on in 4 for ages. So I did that, and then after a while I thought, okay, this is 3/4 coming up. I can't work out what's going on. I'm just going to change. So I changed, and I changed wrong. And then everyone sort of looked up. I thought, well, I've committed now. There's a few other time changes. I'm not stopping. We're going this way. Everyone will adjust. And they did. Yeah. Except the basses.
Thanks, lads.
Those sods in the bass section. And I cued them. And I remember Renato Bragimov, sadly, who just passed away just a month or so ago, looked at me, shaking his head, saying, no. I said, please, yes. And then, of course, after the concert, there was the usual jokes from everyone. Oh, where were you tonight, Mike? We noticed you weren't playing the bass. Yeah. La, 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 la. So that was really how it started. And then from that point, I was Gergiev's assistant in Rotterdam, and I did for him all of the rehearsals, occasionally including the general, and he would come in for the concert.
That's
that
amazing.
Was intense. Yeah. That was quite that was an amazing thing to sort of really get to do. You know, Mahler das Lied van der Erde, Brahms Requiem, and all the Brahms symphonies, and just take the orchestra through it. For me, it was invaluable. And then in the LSO, when he would be late, at times, and he's reasonably well known for that. Catherine would say, in her Northern Irish, Michael, we don't know where he is. Could you have Mahler 3 ready for the morning? And I said, sure, no problem. Yeah. And I had that, and it was phenomenal. So I mean, my conducting career was really unusual. I learned to conduct, I suppose, effectively with the LSO, and then once I realized I could leave, then I started again towards the bottom and tried to sort of work my way back up. Yeah. And the way that I left was a little unusual. So it was clear that I was going to be leaving to be a conductor, and the LSO allowed you to go from 100% down to 50%, and you could choose the work that you did. And it was getting to the point as I did a bit more conducting, and I did some jump-ins with Anna-Sophie Mutter, and I did quite a lot of work with her. This is around 2009. That I wasn't going to be able to stay in the LSO. And actually, Lenny Mackenzie's a wonderful guy, the chairman of the orchestra, who was the co-leader, came up to me, and we were in Abbey Road, and he said, look, Michael, we know that you're planning to be a conductor. We just want to know, you say you're going to leave. Do you have any sense of times? And I remember I sort of sat down on the bass, and I felt really awful. I thought, gosh, are they pushing me out, or what do I do? And he wasn't meaning that at all, but it was strange. But it was one of those amazing moments, because then I checked my mobile phone in the next break, and it was, I'd signed with management, and they said that, we've just had a phone call from the North Shopping Symphony Orchestra who want to offer you the position as chief conductor. And I sort of said, Lenny, you asked me a question about an hour ago. Yeah. I said, when am I going to go? I can say, well, look, actually, it's going to be very soon. Yes. And I then took a year sabbatical and didn't come back. So in no way was it planned, but the way that it worked out was amazing for me, really.
Wonderful story. I was nodding and smiling away because a couple of those instances, like very late jump-ins I experienced at the CBSO, thinking about being on tour and Andrews Nelson's going ill, and could you do the concert tonight? You've got half an hour's seating rehearsal. That sort of thing. I was smiling away thinking, yeah, I've been there, I've done that. But what it brings up is, something that maybe you can tell me is it's the way that you walk to a concert hall as a player, and then in the next 3.5 hours you become the conductor, and then after that, you may well have people knock on your door and say nice things to you and whatever else, but then you're probably on your mobile ringing up your mates in the orchestra saying, well, where are you? I'll come and have a pint. And then you become back in the orchestra again. And for that period of time, I found it quite tricky to take one hat off and put another one back on again. Well, how did you find it?
I think you're absolutely right. It is strange because you can't really be both. And to highlight that, as soon as I could, I sold my bass. I sort of cut off my safety net, said, no, I'm going all in. Because for quite a while, I was the bass player who conducted, or I was sort of a bit of both. And for me, it was more for me than anybody else. Psychologically, I didn't quite sort of have an identity. I'd be doing these great concerts and doing these tours, and then sort of going back and next week do a school's concert playing the bass. And I felt privileged to be in the orchestra, but I was a bit betwixt and between. And I think for the players, it was also clear that, I was leaving and to do something else. And I think for them, it was, well, are you in or are you out? Sort of. And I don't think I didn't know of any resentment or anything like that. People were very, very goodwill. They had a very good will towards me in terms of me going on to become a conductor. There's the usual jibes and jokes about becoming the enemy and all that sort of stuff, and taking up conducting, giving up music. I mean, we've all heard the jokes.
We've heard them. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Was I found in particular that that from some of my colleagues, there became quite quickly a frostiness that wasn't there when I was just a second fiddle player. And then there were other colleagues who suddenly spoke to me more often than they'd ever done in the previous 10 years or so. Did you find that? But it sounds like in general you had, like I did, a very, very, very big sort of feeling of support from people. But did you have those sort of instances of people you think, well, we seem to be quite good mates, but now you're a little bit standoffish about this?
I think there was a couple of members, sort of older members, who, who's this young upstart? Who does he think he is? There was I had a little bit of that, but in general, not. And the bass section was such a tight-knit group, and we really socialized a lot, and they were very supportive and really warm and encouraging about it. So I have to say that really the orchestra were marvelous in it. And the way that I was able to kind of drift out of the orchestra over time. And they were so amazing with me about, if I got a call to go and conduct somewhere, I'd say, guys, can I be off next week? I've been given a call over here. And they'd say, look, we'll make it work. So I really felt, I have to say, extremely well supported. But of course, the transition period for me was relatively short. I wasn't doing it for many years. It was over reasonably quickly, within a couple of years, and I was gone. So I think I was quite fortunate.
Well, bravo to the LSO, because they have, or had, the same attitude that the CBSO had with me. Mine was 9 years. I transitioned from becoming assistant conductor to finally not playing. Like you, I didn't sell my violin because it didn't belong to me. It belonged to the orchestra. I gave it back the next day. So that there was no way of going back to a certain degree. But yeah, bravo to them. More orchestras should have that attitude with players if they want to pursue something like conducting or whatever else, to give them the time and the space to do it, and the ability, as you say, can I go next week? Yes, go. We'll make it work. We'll sort it out. I suppose maybe in the back of your mind, like it was in the back of my mind, I was thinking about the section I was in and thinking, oh, dear old second fiddle, somebody's covering for me again. This is a bit unfair. And that does sort of lead the witness a bit. And you think, well, maybe it is time to think about moving. And that's when it happened for me, when I kept thinking, oh God, I've let them down again. I'm not in again. Who have I called in this week who was expecting to have the week off? And that was a catalyst, I think.
Yeah, and I think that does happen. But because I helped the orchestra out a lot as well with various things when they were in trouble, I think there was generally a lot of goodwill in that sense. But you're right. I mean, how was it for you? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about that transition, but how was it sort of psychologically going from being a player to a conductor?
I found it hard on the days where I suspect the LSO would have the same sort of schedule, where I might be playing for 3 hours in the morning for the guest conductor that week, and then there might be a 3-hour rehearsal in the afternoon after lunch where we were rehearsing for a family concert on the Sunday, which I was conducting. And I found it hard going from my seat to the podium over lunch, because of course there has to be some sort of line drawn in the sand mentally between everybody, because you're conducting them, And I did have comments saying, "Oh, you're far too pally this afternoon. You're not being a real conductor. You're just Mike stood on the podium." And I found those days very, very difficult. When it was my turn for a subscription week, I might have had the week off beforehand to get myself prepared. I found that an awful lot easier. Having said that, because I still conduct them very regularly. they're still the hardest orchestra I ever have to conduct, because there are people there who remember me as a 21-year-old fiddle player and doing all of the things that a 21-year-old fiddle player does, on tour or on the back of a coach. And so, that they're still the hardest orchestra I have to conduct, but I love conducting them. So it was, and actually the way I got out, as I've mentioned on an earlier episode, is the chief executive, and Simon Webb, who was his assistant at the time, who's now at the BBC Phil, said to me, look, why don't you take a 2-year sabbatical? We'll keep your job open for 2 years. And if you like conducting, well, that's a perfect way out. But if you don't, you've got the safety net of coming back to the orchestra, and it just worked perfectly.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, and it is nice. And how have you experienced sort of coming from being a player? And what do you find is the advantage of having played in orchestra? Because obviously many great conductors, don't play in orchestra, so there isn't one way up the mountain.
Well, I like the fact that you've just asked my next question to me when I was going to ask it to you. But between us, we can talk about it. Look, I think when you're playing, there are times often you sit there and think, why is the conductor not fixing that problem? And I think there are times when you're stood on the podium, you don't hear that problem. You hear an awful lot more from within the orchestra. It's like, I always use the analogy that it's like a great engine, a wonderfully turbocharged V8 engine. But, if you're stood on the street, you hear this noise. But as a player, you're one of the bits of that engine. You can see that maybe there's not enough oil in that bit, and the air filter needs changing. And so you actually hear a lot more of the clicks, whirs, and bangs from within than you do often when you're stood on the podium. So therefore, you learn so much from within the section. You as a bass player, you're hearing everything above you. You're hitting the ensemble, the tuning as well, especially for you. As a second fiddle player, I was right in the middle of the stage. Everything was flying over my head from the wind and brass. There's so much stuff there that you take away with you. And when there's a problem that you need to sort as a conductor, you think, I know how to fix this, because I know what the problems are from within. Do you agree? Especially, I'd like to know your experiences as a bass player, who's more often than not would sit one side of the stage or the other. Occasionally, maybe at the back if you're doing a Viennese setting for Bruckner or Mahler. But even then, at the back, you've got everything in front of you. What were your experiences of how orchestras work, and what do you regularly use now?
Yeah, I agree with your points entirely about it. And I can imagine being a second violinist, actually, it's a great instrument to learn to conduct, because you're always in the middle of these rhythms and harmonies and locking together winds and firsts and everything. And bass player, of course, no one ever listens to us. Let's be honest. Our job is just to accompany and where to stick a pizzicato and all those things. For me, the big things I learned were just to have such a respect for the musicians in the orchestra. And twofold with that. Firstly, how much the musicians cover things and fix things for conductors. But secondly, how much musicians we need conductors. And I think, I see a lot of young conductors when they start say, I just don't want to get in the way. The musicians know what to do. And then actually it's not true. I said, if you let an orchestra play on its own, after a while it gets slow and it becomes mezzo forte. Actually, you do need conductors. And if without that, they can do it on their own, but it takes a lot more rehearsal, and someone has to ultimately step into that void of leadership. So musicians need conductors, and conductors need musicians. And this is how this relationship works. So I think hearing great players around me all the time, amazing sounds and quality, the advantage for me was if I went to an orchestra when they played the first take and it was really good, or the first read through, I wasn't thinking, wow, it sounds like this, what do I say now? My oral perception of it was heightened as a result of playing in the London Symphony Orchestra. So I was able to already get stuck in. I think the other area was sort of rehearsal psychology and knowing and sort of, dare I use the word, smelling the atmosphere.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Please use that word. You like me would have sat there at times when you think, in the orchestra, you think, look, if I was conducting, I'd be calling a break now. And you can smell things in the room. You can feel it. You think, right, this is the perfect time to call a tea break. And then the conductor will carry on for another 10 or 15 minutes. And they've lost the orchestra. In that 10 or 15 minutes, you just... absolutely. You can read the room, smell the atmosphere. And
I think you as a result of that, when to drop in the human or when to just to play. I mean, there's times when to get in and do the detail. There's other times, I mean, a colleague in the orchestra used to always joke about 2:50, 10 to 3. He said, Jerry Newsom, he always says, it's a nothing time. You've done 10 till 1 and 2 till 3. You're halfway through the first bit of the afternoon. You're tired. You're halfway to the next break. It's a nothing time. And that really stuck in my mind. And I always thought, yeah, well, when you get to those moments, just play. Just that be a set time when you do a big section of music. Let them just run it. And other times when you get them fresh, go in and do some of the harder work. And that was really helpful. What I also found interesting was the inconsistency of the players' responses, mine included, is that a conductor's a great conductor if I played well. And then you'd have other conductors come and the winds and brass would love them, but the strings would hate them. And then you have other conductors come and on one desk, you have someone who has more OCD tendencies, someone who's a spontaneous risk taker would dislike the same conductor. And that was very useful for me because it stopped me being too concerned about being liked by everybody, because you just know it's impossible. There's no point trying. And if someone woken up in a bad mood, or, the guys next to them is irritating them. And if you look, and of course, as you know, if you look at musicians' faces for feedback, you can get into trouble. Some of their happy faces look like a bulldog chewing a wasp. Yeah. So, I mean, it can be a little scary. A little scary.
Oh yeah, the psychological games of looking at an orchestra's faces as they're playing. Just don't go there. Yeah, it's not good.
So I think it was a complete package of, and what I haven't mentioned, of course, is getting to watch and learn from great. We had really great conductors. I mean, Sir Colin Davis when I was there, and then Valery Gergiev took over, and we did some amazing things with him. And then Marius Janssens would come. Simon would come. I only worked with him once, but John Elliott Gardner. So we really had just amazing conductors time and time. So to learn how they crafted rehearsals and concerts, and everyone was so totally different. That really helped me, I think.
So, as you said, the perfect excuse to leave the LSO is that you were offered chief conductor of the Norrköping Symphony Orchestra, straight into a chief position. How did you find that? And it's not just about programming and sorting out the programs for a year. How did you find learning about their employment laws or whatever, all of that, hiring and firing? What was it like for you? And did you enjoy it? Straight, literally, that I can't think of anybody who's done it so quickly, from playing in the bass section to being a chief conductor.
I was really fortunate. So yeah, I did a concert with them in December 2010, and I was there at the right time, and they took a punt on me. But they're well known for taking punts on young conductors.
Yes,
this was the first job of Herbert Blomstead, Franz Welser-Most, and he went from there to the LPO. Yeah. So I mean, they're good. They're good like that, and of course the CBSO is amazing at taking young conductors who end up being brilliant. They're well known for that, of course. So for me, it was an amazing experience because, of course, I was doing everything for the first time. So that was fantastic. I was able to design seasons and build seasons. I didn't have any role in hiring or firing. They would ask my advice or what I felt about certain musicians, but they knew that position typically is not for someone more than 3, 4, maybe 5 years. So there's no point asking me for someone who's going to be there for 20, 25 years. So I helped and guided, but we did some fantastic programs and concerts, and I just was swallowed in the repertoire. Yeah. I was doing so many things, entire concerts of pieces for the first time. And I was always very serious about learning the music. And they were very patient and very good. And at times I drove them too hard. Of course, you make those mistakes and you want to fix everything all the time and think unless you do it, it won't happen. And then you realize, come on, Francis, sort it out. Just let them play. And then that got easier. And then after 4 years, that was time. And I got offered the position in Florida as well. So I was then transitioning to another stage of my life. I was married and different things. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. And it was, and of course in Sweden, they all speak such perfect English. They love the British culture and humor. And they were so warm and so good. I mean, I think of some of the concerts we did, they were just, I mean, a really good concert hall, always nice audiences, and just so good. And I absolutely loved my time there. We're wonderful people.
Mm. As you said, on to the Florida Orchestra, where you're still music director, and also since last year you've been chief conductor of the Staatsphilharmonie Rhineland-Pfalz, where you currently are working in Ludwigshafen. How do you find, with a young family, crossing the Atlantic on a regular basis, working 4 or 5 weeks in Germany and then coming back to the States? And also a rather COVID direct question, which I haven't really asked, is has that proved to be a problem now, working between the two places because of traveling? It's something that lots of people are saying that, maybe conductors won't be able to travel quite as much. Orchestras won't be able to tour anything like as much for a while. How are you finding it currently? But also, how did you find it before COVID, that sort of time constraint thing between Germany and the States?
Well, I'll tell you firstly about the Florida Orchestra, and I'll come to the second part of your question there. So the Florida Orchestra, they asked me to do a guest week. They were looking for a conductor. I hadn't heard of the orchestra beforehand, so I didn't know much about them, but I said, sure. And then I met Cindy, my wife. Now she was in London working, but she's from Florida. Right. She's from Tampa.
Yeah.
And though she had no intention of moving back there at the time, that's sort of how that timing worked. And then I did this concert in October, and it was Britain's Sinfonia de Requiem, Mozart D minor concerto, and Alsace Sprax at Flüster. So it was
nice.
great program. And then they said they wanted me to come back, and they sort of engineered another concert for me in May 2014. And I went back and did that, and then they offered me the job. And they didn't know that my wife was 3 months pregnant. So what it meant was that we could live near her mum and her dad in Tampa. So for us as a family, it was really fabulous. Although that wasn't the reason I took the job. I took it because I saw an orchestra of such potential. I mean, Tampa Bay has 3 million people there, and it's growing. I think 1,000 people move to Florida every day. It's astonishing, the growth. And St. Petersburg is such an arts district now. And so it's a really happening place, and it's very vibrant and exciting. So that's how that worked. For me, COVID, I think, could have been a real nightmare. But what saved me was my brilliantly organized and clearly prophetic wife had decided that I must get my American citizenship as soon as possible. And so in December, I became a US citizen, and I've got British and American. So it meant now for me traveling back and forth, I'm in the best position because I can always get back into America. I can always come to Europe. So that's made a big difference. Like most orchestras, Florida shut down in March, and we'll do our first concerts in 3 weeks. But in Ludwigshafen, they did between May and July 150 concerts.
Wow!
Now some of those were small, tiny chamber things, but some were big concerts. With me doing ensembles of 15 or 20 players. And then since September, they kept going and doing more and more. So they've really done a brilliant job here with the intendant, Beata Feldman, of just keeping going. So that's been great for me just to have a lot of work, and I probably conducted more concerts than most conductors have during COVID. I've been very, very fortunate like that. But the balance of it is not easy. And as you say, I mean, I've been here now, this is my 5th week, and I go back on Saturday, and it's time. So COVID in some ways has made it easier because you kind of do things in blocks and not, higgledy-piggledy back and forth as it can often be the case. But I'm really keen to see my wife and daughter and get home.
I bet. Yeah. I bet. I'm assuming, because just looking down at my crib sheet, dear listeners, I always write a double-paged crib sheet on every conductor before I speak to them. This doesn't all come off the top of my head. Some of it does. But I'm assuming that you were chief conductor in Sweden for 4 years, and now in these two places since. Well, no, there was an overlap between Norrköping and the Florida Orchestra, and now obviously an overlap with Ludwigshafen and the Florida Orchestra, which means that you don't necessarily, or haven't necessarily, done a vast amount of the hamster wheel of guest conducting. A phrase I use because the hamsters seem to like being on the wheel, and sometimes it's difficult to get off. when you guested, or when you guessed, do you have a specific plan for meeting the orchestra for the first time? Are there pieces you always try and take with you, as you know, these are Michael Francis pieces I always take for the first time or want to take? How do you approach it all?
Yes, I mean, guesting is, of course, tremendously exciting, but also reasonably stressful. I mean, for conductors, we're not usually nervous for the concerts. It's always for the first rehearsal. It's the first rehearsal with a new the first rehearsal with a new orchestra and repertoire you're doing for the first time. That's the tough bit. I've become much better about taking pieces that I know well to orchestras. I haven't always done it. I was thinking about a program I did with a North American orchestra, which was all for the first time. Janusz Sheklakian dances, Glasnost violin concerto, Ionescu Romanian Rhapsody No. 1, Bartok Divertimento, and Kadai dances Galanta. Wow. And I did all this because when I took it 2 years before that, I didn't know much about conducting. I thought, I like those pieces. Guess what? I didn't get asked back. Not surprisingly. I mean, they got through it. It was recognizable, but could I do a great artistic job? No, because I wasn't inside me. So now I'm much more respectful. And I did a lot of jump-ins at the beginning. Very last minute, because I think the British training, I was good at sight reading. So I did a lot of that. And now I'm much more careful about what I do. I don't have to do the big jump-ins as much. But sometimes it happens. So now I tend to take things I know very well. But for guesting with orchestras, I mean, as you know, both as a player and as a conductor, really, it all happens in the first 5 minutes or so. Person stands up, starts conducting, you watch them, and as a conductor now, you realize how much you're watching everybody, and you're sussing out the orchestra. How do they respond? Psychologically, you're looking out for who are the alphas and who are the where's it going to be tricky? Where's it going to work? And how's it going to go? And also you're just feeling how the music happens and trying to relax them. And above all, just make music. And you never know how it's going to go. No. And then you have weeks that you think are fantastic and the orchestra gives you mixed feedback, and weeks that you thought you weren't at your best and they love you. Yeah. So it's just not an exact science, because people are not.
No, that's so true. You're right. The first 5 minutes, I think somebody's cruelly quoted somebody that, you can decide on whether they're any good by how they walk in the room. I think that's, that's not fair. But I do remember a trumpet player in the CBSO telling me the quickest reaction he ever saw to a guest conductor was after the first downbeat, which was a short stabbed chord of a piece. And he said he saw 85 people's heads drop in disappointment. Well, after the first downbeat, everybody just went, oh. Because, then you think, well, I've got 5 hours today, 5 hours tomorrow, dress rehearsal of 3 hours, concert, maybe a repeat concert Thursday. And after one chord, everybody just went, oh, and that, which is terribly unfair, but actually it's what it can be sometimes like. It's tough.
I mean, for example, Beethoven 5 I have guessed with it a fair bit, but that's a tough piece to guess with, because the beginning doesn't work until you've explained it. Because you either go da 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 da, cut off, extra bar, or you do dum, ba, 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 bum.
Yes.
And that's always a bit tricky. So that's a piece where you can't immediately run it. You have to fix that. And that sort of sense of interjection and rehearsing straight away is a little awkward. And I'd much rather, because my basic method is to always run the entire piece straight away.
Yeah.
Especially if it's an Elgar symphony, and just run the whole thing, then go back and then start, and then from that point, because they know what they have to fix, which saves you a lot of trouble.
The question I ask every conductor, and I'm intrigued to know your answer, because first of all, you said you really had no formal training as a conductor, and secondly, as you said, you did a lot of jump-ins. So this question is, when you come to learn a score, do you have a method that you use on most occasions? And do you write in your scores? Are you a marker of scores? I am, but lots of others aren't. It's about 50-50 split at the moment. Everybody has a different method. What is yours? Does it differ did it differ when, you had 2 days notice compared to 12 months notice?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is always a fascinating question. And I'm always intrigued to know how other conductors learn it as well, because, some people could just open a score and hear it perfectly in their head straight away. And I'm not one of those. I have to work at it. It's quite hard to do that. So if it's a 2-day or a 1-day jump in and it's unusual repertoire, I stick a recording on and learn it. I mean, this is be pragmatic. I mean, you just do what you need to do to get the score in your head. Ultimately, what the process is, get the score into your head. That's what you're doing when you're studying, and then you're anticipating, you're thinking, and all these things. So when I have time, which is most of the time now, the way I do it is I first open the score, read it through, take as much information as I can, try to hear it in my head. Then very often I listen to a good recording of it straight away, and then I'll sort of put it aside. And then I spend most of my time reading about it. So I really like to read articles. I often, to me, it's a great joy, and this sounds very nerdy, if I can find a PhD or an online article. I use JSTOR a lot. I read a lot of books around it. So I really want to understand where the composer is, how the piece is written. And then I find when I come back to it, my process is pretty clear. I mean, I sort of do the big analysis, the big structural stuff of exposition developments. Then I break it down into phrases. Then I always do, well, I try to always do a vertical analysis of the harmony. Intellectually, that means a huge amount to me to know the harmonic rhythm. And I always conduct at my best when I know the harmonic rhythm of the piece. That doesn't work if you're doing Varese Amérique. You have other things, but so that, and then I go through each group of instruments of all the strings. I do that in a section. Then I'll go through the percussion, harps, and all the other unusual instruments. Then I'll do the brass, checking sure I actually know where they're transposing. Can't say it's an area of tremendous strength, but I do know how to do it. and then all the winds. And by the time I've done that, and I'm thinking, I'm marking, I'm writing, I'm trusting my dramatic instincts, and I do make notes on my score. I do think about it. I do use colored pencils for new pieces. I use that probably less now than I did. I don't need to mark my scores quite as I did when I started, or the cueing. That's not so necessary, but I do use it to write in thoughts I have, so that because the main thing is that when I come back to it, I don't want to start again. No. I want to use it as a reference point. And of course, I'm not preparing things I'm going to say in rehearsal and writing them in. I don't do that. Oh, here's a joke in case that they get tired at 250.
Yeah, exactly.
I think musicians are pretty sharp. They'll see through those ones straight away.
Yeah.
So exactly. I think really to summarize, it's seeing the biggest possible picture and then just narrowing it down to actually the why that thing exists there in the score. Why did the composer do it? And as you know, our biggest job is to take this enormously brilliant music by these wonderful composers, help the musicians play at their best. We just facilitate that so that the audience can have a life-changing experience which understands themselves and the lives of others around them. We're not that important except to facilitate this process for people to be transformed in the audience and hopefully for the musicians to have a wonderful time. But that's not the first thing. The first thing is the audience.
Michael, it's 10 questions time. And so, what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
I think my favorite noise is my daughter had a playful 5-year-old squeal of delight running up and giving me a hug when I land back at Tampa Airport. That's got to be it. There's also the rare sound of me striping a golf ball with an iron and flushing it. It doesn't happen very often, but that sound of a golf ball fizzing is amazing. I'd say a sound that I really dislike is, my brothers know it, of course, and they do it all the time, eating noises. Oh. I can't bear other people's eating noises. That is the veritable nail down the blackboard for me. And I can actually struggle to talk to people if they are noisy eaters. It's just awful and really shallow of me. I apologize.
I don't care how shallow it is. I agree with you. A friend of mine is one of those. It drives me insane. Nobody's given me that answer before, and I wonder why. But brilliant answer. The next one: if you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Well, actually, this is an interesting question. So I'm very strict about taking one day off a week. I don't touch any music on that day off. So this to me happens every week. I always do it. So I do a lot of hiking, and if I can play a game of golf, that's heaven. I mean, that's 4 or 5 hours of me thinking about how bad I am at golf, not about conducting.
Yes.
Walking, family. I mean, I live in Florida, so I'm near the beach. Reading. I do listen to jazz, but I never listen to classical music on my day off. So it's a real variety, but the best of all, always with family, wife and daughter.
Who would be a favourite conductor of yesteryear?
Well, I think we all have to sign a non-Kleiber clause because we'll always say Carlos Kleiber. So outside of that, I tell you, conductor I always listen to is Charles Mackerras, and I didn't ever get to play for him or meet him, but he's such an intelligent and thoughtful and dramatic way of dealing with classical composers. I just find he's so spot on, nearly or invariably. I do. I invariably agree with what he does. I think Charles Munch. And Munch, I mean, the Boston, his sort of things like the Franck Symphony, the way that he shows how you can just be so flexible and free and dramatic and is amazing. Ravinsky, I think, there's that compelling video on YouTube of him conducting Shostakovich 8, when you just see him not moving and just using his eyebrow, and you just think this is the dark arts.
Yes.
And I love, Sir Colin Davis, of course, he recently passed, but playing for him was such a highlight. The sound that he got out of an orchestra, this freedom was amazing. So there's a selection.
And who would be a favourite current conductor?
Actually, I think that's a relatively easy question. I love Ivan Fischer. I think he's a conductor that I'll always listen to what he does. I think he's so thoughtful and so musical. His Bartok recordings, his Mahler and Dvorak, they're just superb. I think Telemann in his repertoire, again, the way that he tackles Schumann, he finds fantasy in a way that I hadn't thought of, but him, it seems just like breathing. I think Kirill Petrenko seems amazing to me. I think he seems the real deal. What I've seen of him on the Digital Concert Hall, I'm just so delighted to see. He's so serious and so honest, and it doesn't seem to be about him, just the music. And the commitment that he's getting is just, and the level of playing. So, there's an example, but I think he's so exciting for the whole industry to see this absolute earnest passion for the truth of music, and not about the celebrity and the, as we know, some of the other stuff that can come with our job. I find deeply encouraging.
What is the hardest work you have ever conducted?
Well, I think probably looking back, it was that first time I did that John Adams concert on virtually no rehearsal, because I remember my brain actually ached after that concert for just sheer concentration. But there's other pieces. I did Varese Amérique, and when you do these for the first time, and most pieces you do for the first time are tough. I did a program in MDR last year, which was actually, it was in January this year. COVID's messed up my timing, and it was Barbara Medea's Dance of Vengeance, Andrew Norman's Switch, which is a monster because every bar changes pattern, and if you get it wrong. And then I did Belshazzar's Feast for the first time. So that was a brain acre. But emotionally, I find Tchaikovsky 6 really hard to conduct, just because of how much of himself he laid bare and how much you have to give in that piece. It goes to such a dark place that I find that one really tough physically, but also emotionally.
Yeah, I'm not sure it would be a piece I would want to do 4 or 5 or 6 nights running on a tour. I think it would take an awful lot out of you.
I've done it 3 times in a week, and by the end of that week, I'm dead.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Well, aside from the annoying new thing we have to think about of masks and hand sanitizer, the things I have to travel now are more a state of my age and doing too much sport as a kid, which is a back stretcher. I have to take in a travel pillow for my neck, which is annoying. But actually, the thing that makes the biggest difference is a good pair of walking shoes, because then you can walk and see the cities. Where I am here in Ludwigshafen, we're near the Pfälzerwald, which is stunning forest. So getting out and hiking or just walking a city is enormously important. And there's shoes that if I wanted to play a game of golf in, I could turn up and do that. So to me, that seemingly obvious choice actually gives a huge realm of freedom in otherwise a busy schedule.
What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I bet my answer is the same as everybody else, and that would be that to be able to sleep in your own bed every night, or just travel with you, or have your family travel with you everywhere. And it's as simple as that. It's just the only thing I would really want to change is to spend more time at home. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, it was a popular answer early on, and then it disappeared for a while. But yeah, it's still very much a drag about being a conductor on the road. You know, like you, if you have two jobs as chief, or even if you're a regular guesting all around the place, yeah, it can be a big drag.
Well, maybe with COVID, conductors are now thinking, gosh, I want to get away from the family. You never know.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, I'd want to be a cricketer. I'd want to be a fast bowler. This is a very strange reference. Most people won't know, but I'm sort of like a modern day Fanny de Villiers. Lots of attitude as a fast bowler, but absolutely no pace whatsoever. So for me, I'd always want to be a cricketer. And failing that, I'd love to be a rugby player or something. But so as a professional sportsman, if I had any element of talent, I would have pursued it.
Cricket, as the listeners will know, is my game, and I can still bowl vaguely well, despite my being hit in the face when the batsman hit it back in my face. What's interesting through these podcasts is that one day I'm going to book a box at Lord's, and I shall invite you, Mark Wigglesworth, Ed Gardner, Bramwell Tovey. I'm trying to think. There's another one as well.
Daniel Harding.
Daniel Harding. Yes, thank you, yeah. Daniel Harding. I think I could fill a box with 8 conductors. We'd all have a brilliant time because we'd all be just watching the cricket. We'd never mention music once, I would suspect. But yeah, I mean, it's the best of all sports.
I agree.
If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
So whenever I come back to the UK, the thing I always crave is rather strange. I want a pint of real beer, not tepid and not too strong and not fizzy. Then I always want a packet of pickled onion Monster Munch, which is stupid, and a Yorkie, because you can't get those things anywhere else. And those are the things I always crave. So, but I think I used to always think I wanted my grandmother's, she's Irish, spuds, bacon and cabbage. But actually, now that I've eaten really good food in good restaurants, I would be different. For me, the main course would be lamb, a rack of lamb, and some outrageous 1959, whatever, Lafitte Rothschild, Bordeaux, something which you couldn't possibly afford normally. I'd want that. And beforehand, some great fish, I don't mind what, but I would want a fantastic white Burgundy, some Pliny Montrachet, something brilliant. And dessert, lemony, and then loads of cheese. And then do what you want with me. I'll be fine. And then a bit of port and a wee dram of something at the end of it. I'm good to go.
Sounds wonderful. I'm salivating thinking about it. That sounds great. Michael, it's been a real pleasure, a real joy. Lovely to talk to you, especially about our similar experiences about being orchestral musicians and what we've learned from inside and outside. So either at the box at Lord's when I've booked it for all of us conductors, or just we'll meet over a pint of real ale, and I hope to see you very soon. Great pleasure. Thank you, Mike, and thank you for this marvellous podcast series. Really tremendous. Thank you. A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. After we had finished recording this episode, Michael Francis and I carried on chatting for about an hour, and during this time we discussed whether conductors are born or could they be made, and whether the principle of 10,000 hours of learning has any bearing on the answer to this question. This is now available as a Patreon exclusive mini episode. Just click the link in the show notes below, and after arriving at patreon.com/A Mic on the Podium, you will find out how to subscribe and hear this episode and much more, all for the price of one of those tepid pints of beer. Next time, I chat with a Peruvian conductor who has held title positions all across the globe, from Norway to New Zealand. He has spent a lot of his career working in the United States, which is where he has just started an undergraduate conducting program. Until then, bye-bye.